call. Two men. One named Rich. That's me.
This is Jermaine. Just got off the toilet.
He's a foul man. This is the X's and O's of life.
Huh?
If at any point you thought this was going to be a serious interview, I apologize. Yep. So, hello everybody. Hi wife. It's over there looking for the you looking for the debit card? I think it's in the hoodie, mama. Yeah. We're not editing that out either. This is a real deal. So I have what I just learned, McCraken on the line here. And I did not know his first name or his well, I knew the name, but I was like, what is your first name? Is it Poston? The last name? Poston? Poston. All right, McCraken Poston. And I was like, which one is the first name?
I get it all the time.
Look, it is definitely there's not a lot of you out there. So
well, interestingly enough, there's a story behind it.
I want to hear it.
My father was born in rural Middle Tennessee.
Okay.
He had three brothers, Doug, Cal, and John. My grandmother gives birth to him at home with no doctor present.
Oh, God.
He would have been, I think today, called a preemie because he was so small. They put him on the wood stove and in a box. And the doctor then eventually showed up and told my grandmother not to expect him to live the night. So she decided to give all these family honorary names that she expected would be on a tombstone soon and not that this kid would carry. And he carried it for 85 years. And guess what? I'm his only son. After five daughters. So it was just my destiny to be McCraken King Poston Jr. And so it's, it's a conversation piece.
It absolutely is. That was not the story I didn't really have something expected, but I was not expecting a preemie in a box on a stove. All right. Fair enough. So, as everyone knows, this is kind of the interview edition of the X's and O's in life. This is where I grab folks off the Podmatch site and we talk and giggle, and it's pretty much it. That's kind of the crux of it. And this is another fella I grabbed off here, and it was a 2-month kind of long wait, because you have something that is happening that's pretty cool that we were waiting for.
Book release.
And I'm gonna you blew the load. Come on.
Sorry.
It's fine. Well, it's a book release. There's no surprise. But I want to hear about it because your profile, and I'll tell you this, when I look at folks' profiles, I glance over it. I don't read in depth because I like to be kind of surprised and have an organic, experience while I'm doing the interview. So I definitely more than glazed over yours, but I'm going to pretend that I don't know anything. And you're going to tell me your story and tell me what this is about, because you got an interesting little let's say a conversation piece here. So,
well, my book is a labor of love of many, many years in the making. I tried to write this thing 25 years ago as I came out of an experience of a trial where I represented a very deeply misunderstood failed television repairman. He was the only TV repairman in our small town in Northwest Georgia, a town called Ringgold, Georgia. If you look up Ringgold, we're most famous for the place where Dolly Parton and Carl Dean got married in 1966.
Okay.
They slipped across the state line into Georgia, where we had really lax marriage laws. And 3 weeks after they got their marriage license, this young, recently out of the Army soldier named Alvin Ridley got his marriage license with Virginia Hickey just 3 weeks later. Now, Ringgold is also famous for, in 1969, where George Jones and Tammy Wynette slipped off to do their American marriage. I think they got married out of country, and then they needed to domesticate it. So they just slipped down to Ringgold again, because that's where Dolly went. Well, just in those 3 years, Virginia Ridley had already disappeared off the face of the earth. Her family started looking for her. They started posting articles in the newspaper that she was missing, last seen with her husband. They were extremely frustrated. So I was just a kid back then. I didn't really pay much attention to it. I did know that in the early 70s, this guy came and fixed our TV. And the reason I remember it, one, my dad liked him. My dad traded with him. And so he was at our house more than once. The other thing was that he had a conversation with me about Andre the Giant. He told me he had met Andre the Giant behind the Memorial Auditorium in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And he told me what Andre ate for breakfast. Now, he told me this while delivering a new tuner knob for our Zenith TV that we had worn out. My sisters and I had worn out going back and forth to the only 3 channels that we got out of Chattanooga. And I just remember getting a lecture from this guy on the proper way to tune a TV to another channel. So I thought it odd, and I didn't think of it again until 1997, when this same man, now in his 50s, drives to a phone booth, and in a very monotone voice, emotionless voice, indicates that his wife isn't breathing. Well, the problem is it's a small town. The problem is everybody said, "What wife?" Everybody had forgotten this woman who had gone missing many years. Another whole generation of leaders and others were in place. And what was remaining from her family started feeding the rumor mill that he had held her captive in the basement for about 3 decades. And so I began to be stalked by this guy. Now I began to be stalked on the street for 3 days in a row, where he seemed to be trying to get in my path, literally, by timing his departure from a phone stand and watching my walk from my office to the courthouse. On the 3rd day, I engaged him in conversation, and he began to cry and show a lot of emotion, but it just seemed to be not synced to the events or what was happening in our conversation. So I later learned that afternoon they were burying his wife of 32 years. Several months later, he was accused of keeping her captive in the basement for decades and then killing her. And so by prearrangement, he and I had met several times, and by prearrangement, if things went wrong, we had an agreement that I would come try to at least get him out of jail, and then we could talk about representation later. And so in the summer of 1998, I did learn that he was arrested, and I went to the jail and began in earnest representing the most strange case and strange client I'd ever had. And strange to me. It's unfair to say that with what I know now, because ultimately I was representing a deeply autistic adult. Nobody had ever tested him. Nobody knew. As a matter of fact, 25 years ago, really 27 years ago, there was not a lot of talk about.
That's what I was going to say. Did they even know about that back then?
They were talking about it in children, and they started this kind of all the effort was about, well, what's causing this? Well, in fact, we've had autism probably since there have been humans. And some of our greatest contributors to our culture have been autistic. It provides a laser focus, unclouded by, all the different thoughts we're jamming into our head, probably worse in the age of the internet and phones, where, you're just constantly bombarded by things. There's a serene focus. And that's the way he was as a TV repairman. There was not a TV that this guy couldn't fix.
And that makes sense. The long-winded lecture about the tuning, because he wanted to make sure, hey, you are well aware you do it this way and not any other way. Okay.
So I began to try to represent him, and he began to kneecap every effort. He didn't trust me. He had been extremely litigious with everybody in the community over the years. He was suing everybody. He had this Rube Goldberg type logic of how a minor car accident his father had in the company truck led to the demise of his business, including the seizure of a 1977 Chevy van, which was only gone for 3 weeks. But he refused to accept it when they brought it back. So they just pulled it up next to the house and left it. Well, he still hasn't touched it. It is going into the earth, and there are trees now that have grown up and pinned it in, but he still refuses to accept it back because that keeps his claim open, he says.
Okay. Fair, I guess.
I'm really pulling my hair out because I've got nothing. The guy won't even let me in his house. And so we had quite a time. I realized that, in office visits, when I finally got him to come to my office, we would end up screaming at each other. But little by little, I began to learn some things about him. For one, early on, he was starting to amp up and scream and be ridiculously focused on the taking of his van. And I would say, Alvin, his name was Alvin Ridley. I would say, Alvin, this is a murder case. They're charging you with murder. We have to talk about your wife and her death and that, and not the van. And he says, no, we don't. And I said, why? Because I didn't kill her, but they did take my van. So that was the logic I was having to deal with, that this was not the time to reopen the van seizure. It was not the time to relitigate the young couple being evicted from public housing in 1970. And he just disagreed. So to humor him, I went to look through this volumes of litigation that he had maintained over the years. It seemed that he would start off with a lawyer, and then he would end up invariably either firing the lawyer or the lawyer withdrew, leaving Alvin to conduct his case pro se. And quite frankly, he was fairly successful. You
don't hear that very often.
He overturned the taking of his van, which is why they returned it. He appealed the dismissal of his father's car wreck case to the appellate courts and got that overturned temporarily. Of course, the other side accused him of stealing an important document from the clerk's office. So we had to deal with that as well. Nobody trusted this guy.
Okay.
And my story is, I had just left politics for 4 terms in the Georgia General Assembly, the House of Representatives in the state level of Georgia.
Wow.
I had just lost, impressively lost, I might add.
Oops.
I run for U.S. Congress. And the story actually begins on the night that I lost that race, because I ran into Alvin that night. Whenever there was
Of course you did.
activity downtown.
Of course you did.
Whenever there was activity downtown, he thought people were trying to break into his old shuttered TV shop, which had been padlocked for 15 years. And so I was locking up my campaign office, called my soon-to-be ex-wife, and I'm walking by, and he aware enough of what's going on. He said, you got beat, didn't you? And so I had to suffer that humiliation, remembering that in 1984, at the height of his crazy litigation against everybody, he ran for sheriff of Catoosa County, Georgia. And I remembered it because I was already working in other people's campaigns. I was 24. And I remember the night that he took the podium on the courthouse steps in Ringgold, Georgia. And everybody was considered him a joke candidate. They were just going to jeer him. And he brought a little cassette recorder. And without saying anything, he pushed the button. He had recorded the sign-off for Channel 12 out of Chattanooga. TV stations used to sign off. And at the end of Channel 12 sign-off, they played the national anthem. He recorded the national anthem, and he was playing it on this microphone, making all his detractors and haters, they had to stand up. And I thought it was genius. But, as soon as it was over with and he started unreeling his conspiracy theories, the jeers started up. But I thought he had them there for 2 minutes. I thought, this is an interesting guy. This guy.
You can't boo the national anthem, so it's definitely a good scheme. I like it.
This guy's smarter than we think. And so, flash forward now, it's 1997, and I'm meeting the guy, and he's being very difficult. I take him to the judge because I had communication with him, and I said we had an appointed system to be appointed to represent people, and he wore the same clothes all the time. He smelled really unbathed all the time. He looked kind of pitiful, and so I took him to the judge, and the judge immediately said, "Well, the detectives just left. I know you've got a big piece of property up on the lake near Chattanooga, so I'm not going to appoint you a lawyer." And I looked at him like, what in the world? And he said, Mama didn't ever want me selling that. And so he was without an appointed lawyer. So he and I had to come to some agreement. He wanted me to represent him. And so I ended up taking a security deed on this dilapidated TV shop that had a hole in the roof as big as a refrigerator. All the weather came in. There was no power in there. It was starting to affect the adjacent buildings because of the water and what have you. And so it was kind of humiliation extended from my loss of the congressional race, a real sea change in North Georgia politics, to where my kind was out, and so it was a very tough time for me, and I really didn't want to follow it up with another big loss. So I would be angry with him. And one day in my office, he started the screaming again, and he started talking about the van again. And I just as a reaction, I said, "Oh Lord!" And he immediately was quiet. And I looked at him. He thought I was beginning a prayer.
Oh.
And so he closed his eyes and bowed his head, and I ran with it. I just prayed my advice to him when things would get like that.
Interesting.
And I would say, "Oh
worked?
Lord, please let Alvin understand that while I will look at this old litigation, I need him to talk about his wife. I need him to tell me why she never went out. Lord, please guide him and make him tell me these things so that I can help him in thy name. Amen." And
that is so intuitive. I love that.
And he would react to that. I'd be praying for it. He would start giving me a little more information. Virginia Ridley had epilepsy from childhood. He told me that she had a spell that night before she died. He found her dead that morning. He told me that he always cautioned her not to sleep face down, that she needed to be able to cry out or wake him up. She did have a seizure that night. She told him she was all right. But when he awoke the next morning, she was face down on the bed and not responsive. So he turned her over and tried to apply what he called CPR, but pitifully, it obviously was not adequate life-saving measures, but I think it was too late anyway. So then the dilemma he had was, how do I notify help in this town where everybody's against me? Where
so he had the wherewithal to realize that everyone was kind of like, yeah, you're the not, for lack of a better term, like the town idiot. Like everyone.
He had sued the sheriff.
Well,
No, he ran against the sheriff and he sued the city chief of police over his dad's car wreck.
Fair enough.
One of the deputies, interestingly enough, there's a family of young boys that grew up to be very respectful and important people. But then when they were young kids, their father's business was just a few doors down from Alvin's, and they would see him out and he was easy to pick on, and they would taunt him as kids. Kids do kid things. Well, Alvin and Virginia took it deadly seriously, and he still carried those grudges. These kids have now grown up and we're very respectful and responsible and decent people, but he did not want to stop at the fire station that had an ambulance because, you know, one of those boys was the fire chief. He didn't want to do anything. So he finds a phone stand near my office, interestingly, and behind the courthouse. And he calls first he calls a hospital in Chattanooga, tries to convince them to come down and get his wife. And when they said, "Oh, no, sir, you need to call 911," he reluctantly called 911. And that's where the flat effect voice recording then went around the world, causing the National Examiner tabloid to print the headline, "Sicko holds wife captive 30 years, then kills her." And everyone was piling on in the town about how odd he was, how fueled mainly by Virginia's sisters. Now, Virginia's parents had initiated all of this. They're extremely religious people. In the young couple's public housing, Virginia's parents came in and did a raid looking for beer. This was the buckle of the Bible Belt. It was a dry county back in the early 1960s. You couldn't get legally couldn't get any beer or liquor. And there you have it. It so offended the young couple. It so offended them that they would try to avoid people. Another real insult was when the exterminator was let into the apartment while Virginia was bathing. And then he had the audacity to ask her out. And so it was just overwhelming for the couple. So they went into hiding. They would be at the apartment sometimes. They would be at his parents sometimes. They would be in different places. And ultimately the housing authority started to evict them. And it was really, I determined, again, ancient litigation that Alvin wanted me to investigate. And as I investigated it, I determined that the whole eviction was started by her parents. They were there. And Alvin, being Alvin, he has a jury trial over an eviction. And at some point, the judge just stopped the proceedings. And I know this because I interviewed jurors that were still alive that remembered that very strange trial in 1970, September of 1970. the judge just stopped the proceedings because, knowing Alvin, he was turning it into a circus. And he said, "Mr. Ridley, send to your father, go get your wife." And she came September 15, 1970, to the grand old courtroom in the Catoosa County Courthouse. And she was directed to go back into judge's chambers with the judge, her parents, and Alvin's father. Alvin wasn't even allowed to come back. They feared that he controlled her, so
okay,
that
with
a look he could get her to say anything. She very adamantly said that when she took her marriage vows, she became as one with her husband, and she wishes that people left her alone. And her parents really never did anything after that date. But 27 years later, her sisters remembered the family legend, and I don't blame them. They stirred up the old rumors, but I get it. I get it. I would probably be very suspicious if I had a sister that disappeared and then died,
right.
and I would want to know some answers. So there's no real bad guys in this story. But Alvin, again, being extremely difficult, he won't let me in his house. And I'm saying, Alvin, I got to take pictures to show that there's no bars on the window. The rumors were crazier than the real truth.
Well, stranger than fiction thing.
Yeah. Well, the rumors were that he had a dungeon, that he had the bars on the windows, that and I'd seen the outside of the house. So at some point, because I was getting tired of middle of the night screaming phone calls from a phone stand near a highway, I decided to put a phone in his house.
Oh,
that
okay.
way he could call my Atlanta-based cell phone. It would be, since I'm paying for the phone, he wouldn't be paying for the long distance charge. And I was really coordinating with the phone company so I could be there with my camera ready to go in with the phone guy. And Alvin decides, when he realizes that, I'm just going to put the phone on the porch, on the outside of the house on the porch. And so we didn't get to go in, neither one of us. And so that we went through this for months and months and months. And Alvin began to develop very severe ideations that he was physically sick. And he would always tell me when a court date approached, the Constitution says we don't go to court if I'm sick. And so I had to start carrying a paper copy of the U.S. Constitution to challenge him.
Oh, my God.
I would throw it down and I would say, "Find me the article and I will file the motion." And of course he couldn't. And so I would somehow get him to court. Alvin had, and he claimed he and his wife both believed in the federal government. They did not trust local or state government, but they believed in the federal government. And Alvin, that showed itself many times over the representation. But the most glaring time was the fact that he would try to go to our local congressman's office to get help. This was the guy who dispatched my challenge just the last election cycle. So, I'm in the office with Alvin, and the secretary comes in and says, "Congressman Deal wants you to call him." And I said, "Why the guy that beat me badly? Why would he even want to talk to me?" And then I noticed Alvin kind of sitting up, and I thought, "Oh, Alvin, poor Alvin, he thinks the call's about him." But I'll go ahead and, return the call. And I have the phone, thankfully, to my ear. And I said, "Well, Congressman, thanks. Nice to hear from you." And the only thing out of his mouth was, "Keep Alvin Ridley away from my congressional offices." And I thought, oh, wow. I didn't tell him that the guy was sitting right across from the table from me. But I also knew that this would just defeat Alvin. he so believed in the federal government's powers over these bunch of yahoos that he was, having to deal with in this little town and little county, and including me, because I was his state rep for a while. That we got into it on a couple of things. So I took Alvin outside and I said, Alvin, I got to tell you something. And I thought, how do I say this? And I said, Alvin, you know that damn congressman that called? And he said, yeah. And I said, he hates me so much, Alvin. He hates me so much that he just told me that if you or me ever go to his congressional office again, he's going to have us both arrested. No matter where we are, he's going to have us both arrested. And I said, if you will just cooperate and help me represent you and be more willing to talk about your wife's death, and if you'll do all that, when this is all over with, and I kind of got quiet, like I was telling him a big secret. When this is over with, I'll show you where he lives. And that satisfied him. He was fine. He was fine with that. And he walked away and drove away. And so, but I had nothing. We were careening toward a September 1998 trial, and I had nothing. And he still wouldn't let me in the house. I was disturbed by a couple of things that were in the reports, but nothing that couldn't be explained by epilepsy. The deceased had what they call petechia or petechial hemorrhages around her eyes and around her mouth. And the state was saying, well, that's what happens when someone is asphyxiated. It's the blood pressure going up into the head and not getting down the neck. It has to go somewhere, and especially in an excited state of the victim, it's just going to be pushing out through the skin. And Alvin said, well, she got those spots every time she had a bad spell. And I believed him. We had a really famous lawyer from these parts named Bobby Lee Cook. He was the person they based Matlock after. It's pretty much well known that he was the pattern or the inspiration for the Matlock character. Well, Bobby Lee is in this age. He was you'd think he would be toward the end of his career, but his career went on and on for years thereafter. But he was so gracious, and I went to his office in Summerville, Georgia, and told him about my case. And I said, I just really need to see what these things petechia look like. He brought me into his beautiful library, and he brings 3 forensic pathology books down, not your average coffee table book, because it's people in different states of death. And but I said, do you mind if I copy some of these? He said, no, you take them. You keep them as long as you need. And that graciousness was so kind, because it got me on the path of trying to explain these petechial hemorrhages. The internet was young. It was 1998. I was finding some abstract articles on the internet where you had to like hand write down the URL.
Oh my!
You had to hand write it down and hope that you typed it in the next time. I still have that handwritten URL for a medical digest. And I was seeing this one name in all the best articles about this syndrome called sudden death and epilepsy. And I don't want to horrify your listeners who have epilepsy. Epilepsy is very treatable. The problem is this woman had not been treated that anybody could tell in forever, as far as anybody locally was saying. So, but if you're not medicating, you can die of epilepsy in this syndrome called sudden death and epilepsy. And this one expert on it was a guy named Braxton Bryant Wanamaker. What a great name.
That sounds very impressive.
Yeah. And so I figured out that where he was and called him in Orangeburg, South Carolina. And he was very dry. He was very hard to talk to. But I said, look, I've got this death case, and I think it's an epilepsy death, but the state is saying it's asphyxiation, and they're basing it on these petechial hemorrhages. And he says, oh, my patients have those all the time. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to need you. And I got what it would cost. I got what it would cost, and I was paying out money that I didn't have. And Alvin sure wasn't going to be good for it, but I thought maybe he will be, if with the building and all that. So I was so excited about, getting some defense going, but I still couldn't explain what her conditions were like in the home because he wouldn't let me in.
Can't get in there yet.
And so I just begged him, and still I'll think about it. That was his refrain.
Oh, man.
So thanks.
What was the issue? Like, why was he so anti? Or do we get to that point?
It was a trust issue.
Trust issue. Okay.
And I began to realize that Alvin was transactional, extremely transactional, but I hadn't really formed that in my head yet. I just noticed that when I would offer to take him to the grocery store, just out of the goodness of my heart, I just thought, I want the guy to stay in for a while, because they tried to put him back in jail at one point, saying that he was seen with a gun and that he had threatened a deputy. And so
he leaves his house, he's like a leper at that point.
So I would take him to buy groceries, and I would say, just stay in your house. That he wouldn't let me in, by the way. The helping carry groceries got me stopped at the door.
I thought about it. I was like, there's your in.
Yep. Nope. That didn't work.
Oh, boy.
But a couple of things happened. One, I got a continuance from a September trial, and our terms were 6 months apart. So I thought, man, I've got 6 months now. And the judge says, nope, we're going to have a special term for this and another case in January. So I thought, okay, it's half of a term, but I'll take it because I got nothing. And so I decided to throw myself. I've remarried. Decided to throw myself a big birthday party, and we had a kegger. It was a great one, and I was just kind of cleaning up at the end of it. It was about 2 a.m. and I was just kind of getting the sticky spilt beer off the wood floor, and the CNN was on. CNN. I don't know if it was headline news or it was the one that cycles about every 30 minutes. And they mentioned the Olympic track star, Florence Griffith Joyner, who I knew had died in September of 1998. They mentioned her autopsy being released. And they said she died of a seizure disorder. And so I went and grabbed the newspaper, because apparently it was also in the newspaper that day. And I find Orange County, California medical examiner, a couple of names of medical examiners. And I don't want to mispronounce this guy's name, so I'll just say he was the medical examiner.
Fair enough.
So Monday morning, I called. And, when a lawyer calls, people don't want to talk to you. It smells of subpoenas and litigation. But at the same time, I've got bar rules that keep me from ever misrepresenting myself. I couldn't say I'm a, mortician and I want to have some records to study or whatever, or a student. So I just decided I was going to be very disciplined, and I was going to tell exactly the truth. But I was going to use phraseology that may not be standard. So I called and I said, I need to talk to this doctor. And they said, well, who is this? I said, well, this is Poston from Catoosa County, Georgia. Well, the only people I know to say they're from a county are cops. That, you ever say, in Georgia anyway, you don't say I'm from so-and-so county. you usually say you're from a town. So I just said, this is Poston from Catoosa County. We've got a case here, meaning me and Alvin.
Right.
We've got a case here of a suspected epilepsy death. And I know that you just did this extensive autopsy of Florence Griffith Joyner, or FloJo as she was popularly called. And we'd really like to see it, me and Alvin. And the doctor came on the line. And I really just wanted to make myself sound busier than he was. So I would say, oh, I just got a second to talk, but we really just need to see this autopsy because we've got a death here that may be very similar, but it's, you know, it also could be a criminal investigation. He sent me FloJo's autopsy, and it was almost identical to the markings that were on Virginia Ridley.
Interesting.
And here's the most famous woman in the world, famous woman athlete in the world, who had, of course, a world-class autopsy compared to the least, arguably the least known person in the world, who had it's kind of a quick autopsy. And so
I'd say a quick and biased one, if anything.
It was huge for us. But at the same time, there was so much that just could not be explained about Alvin and about Virginia. I finally was just so resigned to the fact that I would never get into his house. On Thanksgiving of 1998, my new wife and I went to our different families' events. They were all local. And my parents, my father and my mother together, were fixing up a plate and instructed me, their son, take this to Mr. Ridley. He doesn't have anybody, probably doesn't have any Thanksgiving food. That's the last place I wanted to go. And I let them know that, but they just encouraged me to take it. It was that gesture. When I showed up at the door, I took my wife home, and then I came back. Went to the door. I never knew if I was going to get shot through the door or whatever. I knocked on the door. He opened it. I said, Alvin, my parents wanted you to have this Thanksgiving meal. His transactionalism made him want to give me something. So he said, just a minute. He closed the door, and then he came back and he said, come on in. And in this very strange house, very dark, the whole room was illuminated by a red, like old-fashioned large Christmas light bulb.
Oh, geez.
And
that's
then,
unnerving.
And then there was a string that a bare bulb from the ceiling came on when the string was pulled. And it was, you know, I'd been in a lot of houses of people who are not on the top of the socioeconomic scale. I campaigned through that whole community for most of my life. Very often there's a bed in the living room because it's the warmest house in the room. It's where the stove or the fireplace or wood stove is. And I recognize from the pictures, there's Virginia's deathbed. And by the way, there's the same covers that were on it. I'm not even sure that they've been ever changed since her death.
They weren't.
And there are these pillows that were without even pillow covers. And they had years and years of like saliva stains.
Oh.
And it was really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But then on another wall, and the people who like Forensic Files and American A&E's American Justice will start recognizing this story at this point, because this case has been featured on both those programs. I began to make out that there was one wall covered in paper, almost completely covered, tacked, stapled, taped, any way you could apply.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like,
paper.
Notebook paper. Is that what we're talking about?
No, all kinds of paper. Insides of cereal boxes turned inside out, spiral bound notebooks, pages from notebooks, the margins of a newspaper article, all bore the same handwriting because it was so unique. It had a very interesting flair on the lower reaches of letters, like a Y that goes down, or the letters that drop down below the line, had a flourish to them. And I was looking, trying to adjust my eyes. I couldn't see them, I remember, because the shadow of my big head was getting in the way of them. So I had to like approach it from the side and try to read them. There were poems, there were recipes, there were discussions of TV shows, there were discussions of what Alvin had learned out in the world that day. And they were all written by Virginia Ridley, the woman that
was
had not
supposed to
been
be
seen since
right.
September 15, 1970. And here we are in Thanksgiving of 1998. So almost 28 years. And well, actually more than 28 years, 28 years and a month. And I said, Alvin, what is all this? He said, well, Virginia wrote them. And I said, this is the woman that everybody says was locked in your basement. And there's poems. Wait a minute. Here's a piece of correspondence from the HUD secretary mentioning a letter she wrote to Richard Nixon about you getting evicted from the housing authority. And it's addressed to her, and it's acknowledging her letter to President Nixon. And he goes, yeah, she wrote a couple of others too. And Alvin later told me that Virginia sent him to Washington to see Ronald Reagan. And Alvin, I had worked in Washington, and I, of course, wanted to go back to Washington. But I had worked in Washington for our congressman before the one I ran against. And I knew the layout. I knew the Washington so well because I spent a whole summer up there being an intern. And I knew the layout of the White House. And I was asking him probing questions about his trip to Washington. Mm-hmm. First, I asked, how long did it take you to get there? And he goes, oh, it took me a long time. I had to stop and sleep. And I had to keep stopping and putting oil in my car. And I thought, that's not a person telling a story. That's a person telling truth. That he's telling about the journey and how hard it was. And I said, well, why were you going there? And he said, well, Virginia told me to go tell Ronald Reagan about us getting thrown out of public housing. Well,
I don't mean to laugh, but
it was over a decade since they got thrown out, and they're taking it to Reagan. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I finally found the White House, and then I finally found the place to park. And then I started walking in the gate, and these guys with long guns yelled, halt. And they said, what is your business here? And I started telling them about us getting kicked out of public housing in Ringgold. And they said, go home. And that was another indicator to me that he was telling the truth, because it was kind of a humiliating story for him.
Right.
So,
because that's who he trusted. He trusted the feds. Yeah.
And so I said, Alvin, what did you do then? He goes, well, I went and got my car and I found a phone booth. And I said, what'd you do? He said, I called the White House and I talked to Nancy Reagan. And I said, okay, Alvin.
Can you do that? Is that I was going to say, like, is that a possibility?
I said, Alvin, how do you know it was Nancy Reagan? He goes, because the White House is where they live, and it was a woman that answered.
Oh, God.
and I said, well, what did she say? What did you say, Alvin? He said, I started telling about them falsely evicting us from public housing. And I said, well, what did she say? She said, go home.
Yep.
And so I really, while doing this book, I really wanted to reach out into the Reagan Library to see if there's a record of this call, and I got nowhere with it.
Yeah.
Or the record of the strange man entering the White House grounds. In today's times, they would have taken him down. They would have shot him.
Yeah.
So so I'm just flabbergasted by the discoveries in there. And then Alvin says, well, you can't have them and you can't use them. And I said, why?
Mm.
And he said, because that's all I've got left of her.
Yeah.
And so I said, Alvin, let's pray about it.
Oh man.
And I started one of my evangelical prayers about how, Lord, send us a sign if you do not want me to use these. And I had a really short statute of limitations on that, asking for a sign. It was like 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, thank you, Lord, for not telling me not to use these. Now, please help Alvin feel comfortable. Ultimately, Alvin said, I said, Alvin, at least let me copy them.
Right. Like take a picture or something. Right.
Well, but if I copied them, I would have what to give to the DA.
Yeah.
Then it would give me more time because I had to have originals. Now, I did tell him that I could substitute a copy once we got the original admitted. And so he understood, or it seemed, and he said, I'll let you rent them papers for $200. So I had to pay him $200 to copy his papers.
Fine by me.
And I spent 4 days in that house. There was a lot of vermin, and there's 2 cats that I will save for the readers. Because
no. Tell no.
Oh no.
Oh boy.
It's just
real bad.
I gotta leave something. But,
okay. All right.
Two famous cats are in the story, and they're not doing much about the rat problem in that house or the roaches. I don't expect cats would do much with roaches other than toy with them. But
yeah, I was gonna say I feel like they play with them. And that's about it.
Yeah. So I kind of get the place organized. There were, I estimate, 15 to 20,000 entries by Virginia.
Jesus.
And they dated back to right after the marriage. Some of them were dead on talking about the controversies and her falling out with her family. Dead on saying, my dad died, but I don't want to go to his funeral because of the way my family has been treating me. And it was kind of a loose leaf diary.
Right.
And yet there would be songs and poems and this interpretation of the world that Alvin came home every day and told her about. She also had an obsession. I would almost say crush, but I think she was too good a woman to would ever admit that, on TV's and Hollywood's Ron Howard.
Really?
Well, just think of all the wholesome characters he played over the years.
I mean,
Ricky, and then did all these great movies.
Yeah.
But she was obsessed with him. And she'd clip anytime he was in the newspaper, she would clip it out. And there was one with him with his new wife, and she wrote out in her very distinctive hand, Ron Howard and his wife Cheryl, and just saved all that stuff. And I used some of it at trial.
Yeah.
To show, she was a fangirl. She was not she obviously, there were no TVs in the basement. She obviously watched TV all the time because she wrote about all the shows.
And that's how the stuff was timestamped. It's not like it was dated January 12th of 1980, whatever. It was current events she was talking about.
It was current events. All of the moon landings.
Interesting.
All of the moon landings. The different world events. All of it I could timestamp by date. But she did date some of it.
Wow.
And so it was fascinating, but I had the issue of him not wanting me to use it. So he would come to the office and he would carry it with these giant suitcases, these old suitcases. And he had gone through it and gotten everything out of order. And I was so mad, but I couldn't say anything because I was walking on the thinnest of ice with him.
Yep.
And so I would just go through it and copy. Oh, no, I really can't use this. Why is this in here? It doesn't help. Copy. And then all of a sudden, there's one of the ones that I had put in a special place. And I said, Alvin, do you want a Coke? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, go to the fridge and get you a Coke. I dropped that document behind the copying machine.
Yeah.
I don't want to copy it now. I will come get it later. I had to have something there to defend him with. And he was telling me that his legal advisor was telling him not to use those documents. And I said, well, who am I then if I'm not your legal advisor? Well, he mentioned this guy who was another character in town. He rode around on a bicycle selling things out of catalogs from the basket of his bicycle. And I only knew him as Salesman Sam. That's what everybody called him in town. And Salesman Sam was giving my client alternate legal advice.
Wonderful.
And I was furious. And I said, you know, Salesman Sam doesn't know shit about what I need in this trial. And so, you know, quit undoing my organization. Well, you know, Alvin would get us back up a little bit if I, you know, fussed at him. So anyway, I basically stole several documents and dropped them behind the copying machine. Now, some of these documents were quite old and they were very delicate.
Okay.
And they had already been eaten by the silverfish and the you know, used as nesting materials by the mice and the rats. And so there were precious few, what I call the gold file, which was, this is the stuff that's going to free this man. And then there was a lot of other stuff that was just interesting, the Ron Howard obsession and things like that, that just showed this is a normal young woman, you know, in her 40s.
Not in a basement.
Yeah, exactly. Who's got full access to the world, including here's a president from the HUD secretary, and here's letters also from U.S. senators and a U.S. congressman, the federal government. That's what they believed in, and that's what she wrote. And so it was kind of wild when the trial began to come forward. I was appointed on a case, trailer park knife fight. And
all right.
And I had another lawyer that was appointed with me, so I was leaning on him a lot on that case. But I had to try it before Alvin's case. But we're picking jurors out of the same pool. So I said, Alvin, you've got to be there. For one, they call the calendar of all the cases up front, so you need to be there to answer yes. And before I get back to that, we had an episode where he fled from coming to our motions hearings. And the judge was threatening to put him back in jail. But I think the more obvious threat that he was just deny all of our motions. And but I knew the judge would know that would have potential appellate issues. So he was just using his threat. I'll just put him in jail till trial if he doesn't want to show. Well, I found Alvin at the Veterans Administration clinic in Chattanooga, and I called ahead, and I was on his list to be able to get information about him. And the lady whispered, yes, he's here. And I said, why is he there? And she said, he says he got bit by a giant spider. And it just sounded like one of Alvin's, you know, fantasies. So I said, well, just keep him there because I'm trying to keep him from going back to jail. So I went up there. This is in like September. I went up there, walked in, said, get in the damn car. You're about to go to jail if I don't get you down to this. And I just told him off the whole way. I feel terrible about that now. But we got in the courtroom, and I'm kind of winking and nodding at the judge and saying, Your Honor, he was at the VA hospital. He says he got bit by a giant spider, and I'm winking. And the judge starts to lay in on him, and the judge just abruptly stopped and seemed to lose the blood in his face. And I turned around, and Alvin had raised his shirt up, revealing the most grotesque wound I've ever seen. He got bit by a giant spider, obviously. It looked like a volcano about to erupt with veins and
oh God,
turning purple, and nobody wanted to see his white belly with that big grotesque bite about to erupt on it. And the judge just said, "Mr. Ridley, I'm just going to let you go home and rest this off. We'll do the motions later in the week." So we already had that problem of him leaving.
right?
So we're picking the jury in my first case, and I want Alvin just to look at the names. He may remember he did business with somebody. He may take a check mark by that person. Set him all up, and then I forgot him. I was doing the jury selection for the first trial. Well, a few minutes, well, actually about an hour and a half later, the DA kind of jokingly says, "Well, your buddy's been arrested down in Rome, Georgia." And I said, "Who?" And he said, "Alvin Ridley." And I said, "No, he didn't." I turned around. He wasn't in the courtroom. I called a U.S. Marshal at the federal courthouse in Rome. And I said, "I understand you have Alvin Ridley." And he says, "Yes, we recognized him from the news." And I said, "Well, what did he do?" He said, "He gave us the bum's rush. And we were concerned because it seemed that he had doused himself with gasoline." And that part threw me back. And I said, "Well, what did he do?" And he said he ran into the federal judge's office and started yelling that his lawyer hadn't done anything about his case in Catoosa County. So he was complaining about me and trying to get the federal government to intervene somehow. And I said, "Sir, I think he's harmless." And he says, "Yeah, he explained that his car broke down and he got up into the carburetor and got gasoline on him. And it's pretty strong smell. But I wanted to say, it's probably improvement of how, he usually smells." But that was a thing that I got onto him about at one point in extreme frustration. The feds let him go and he came back home. And of course, I confronted him and, "What in the hell were you trying to do?" And he said, "My legal advisor advised me to try that."
Oh my
And of
God.
course, it was Salesman Sam. And I got Alvin settled in his house, and I went and confronted Salesman Sam. And it wasn't pretty, but at the same
Shouldn't be.
time, I needed Salesman Sam because he claimed to be one of the few people who had seen Virginia Ridley.
Oh God! So you can't even lay into him. Oh my God!
Exactly. So I had to, not only that, I had to buy some of his crap from his catalogs because Alvin wanted me to, and so I was being scammed.
No wonder you wrote a book. Jesus.
I was paying Alvin to cooperate, and then I started buying useless stuff from Salesman Sam. I bought a gross of Bic pens with my name and my office phone number on it. And when they came, they were dry as a bone. They were probably 5 years old, 25 years ago. I did a promotion for the book where I was giving out these completely useless
did you?
dry artifacts. And I said, "I promise you, they're no more dry than they were 25 years ago when I got them." But so in any event, they released Alvin. Alvin was then put in the courtroom and back again to help figure out who the jurors were. Lost the first case. The guy got slammed by the prosecutor and that of course gave Alvin no additional confidence about my abilities.
Right.
And then we started his trial. To get him to the trial, well, right before the trial, I just lost it with him. And I just kind of got on him about everything. And I said, "We've got a truck stop down the road. Why don't you just go take a shower? I bought you new clothes. I don't know why you don't wear them. I need you to dress up a little, but I need you to please go take a shower." I immediately felt bad after I said it. I really felt
I get it.
badly. I just felt like that was low. I didn't need to go there. Maybe he can't help it. And sure enough, the very soon thereafter, either that night or the next night, I was in my office working on the case. That's big old giant PC computer monitor, and right next to all the files on the floor, right next to the air conditioner vent in my office. And I hear something. Well, after I had yelled at Alvin about his hygiene, the first thing out of his mouth was that he has a rat in his car that lives in his car, but he knows how to get it out before he drives anywhere. And that way the rat doesn't get lost somewhere out and about. So the rat gets out of the car and then he comes back into it when he gets home. And I said, I was so glad that he wasn't just hurt or upset about my talk about his hygiene. And I said, well, how do you know it's a rat? And he goes, well, he leaves number twos all in my car. Well, Alvin leaves food in his car. And so naturally something's going to chew through metal to get to that,
Right.
But it came up through, one of the weaker parts of the system or through the dash or something, and regularly dined in Alvin's car. Well, Alvin said, well, what you do is you get in the car and you get real quiet, and then you scream at the top of your lungs, and the rat will leave, and then you can leave. And so I just kind of chuckled at that story again, glad that I didn't hurt his feelings so badly. And I'm at my office and I'm hearing this something up under my office, and it's making a noise like a rodent.
Yeah.
And I decide I'm going to try Alvin's method. I lay down on the floor. I scream suddenly and loudly as this thing was approaching. I got skunk sprayed right in the face, in the face, all over the files, all over me. People in court forever kept picking up on the skunk spray from the files because I couldn't wash them off. So it was like Lysol on top of skunk on top of old files. And Alvin got to have the last laugh with me about, I don't know if I can sit here next time. So it just really taught me a lesson. People can't always help their circumstances. And so the trial began, and Alvin was just doing this death stare to the jurors, and then he would be jingling what sounded like $28 in change in his pockets, and I would be grabbing his arm, and then he wanted to advise me on notes, and all I had was a Post-it notepad while I was doing some cross-examinations, and I could hear Alvin writing really loudly. And then I was noticing the jurors aren't even watching me or the witness at all. They're watching Alvin, and he's got this grid of all the Post-it notes all laid out in a grid on the table for me, and they're in no particular order. And I go over and look at them, and it says lies, not true. Okay. I mean, they're like the same words repeated over and over and over again. Those were supposed to be my guides. Right. And so I gave him a pad then, because at least I could see chronologically, where he was going with it. And I found that pad while I was writing the book. And it was at the same time that I was reading the transcript. And it made me realize why in the transcript, I went from asking the very most salient questions to asking some really, really bad questions. And they were because I was reading them from Alvin's pad. I was having to accommodate him wanting me to ask those questions. And so ultimately, the case was trying pretty well because I was, countering the state's contentions about petechial hemorrhages with Dr. Wanamaker. The most fascinating thing, the night before I put him on the stand, my wife and I took Dr. Wanamaker out to eat. And he was very hard to deal with, to speak to. I felt like she and I were just kids compared to his wisdom. And just toward the end of the meal, as I was paying the bill and handed him his check, he said, well, is there anything else unusual about this woman? And I said, yeah. she couldn't pass gas without writing it down. And he said, oh, that's hypergraphia. A lot of my patients have that, the ones with temporal lobe epilepsy. It doesn't affect what they write, but it compels them to write. And suddenly, the last mystery was solved. And I got to put him up the next day to explain why there are all these random writings on just anything that would bear ink or pencil. And it made me feel better. It made me feel like, well, she hadn't gone crazy and just was writing like a mad person. This was a compulsion that apparently Van Gogh was hypergraphic, and that's why he was so prolific in his painting. And there's a famous New York socialite, actually an Atlanta socialite who lived in New York, whose hypergraphic diaries were published. They were called the Inman Diaries. His name was Arthur Inman. And interestingly, Alvin and Virginia lived on Inman Street. So it was just...
Don't you love how that stuff works out?
It was crazy. So Alvin controlling her writings in the courtroom. And if you watch Forensic Files, one of the jurors is describing the roaches coming out of his suitcases. He was infesting the courtroom with roaches, scores of roaches every day coming out of and scampering into the courtroom. And I was stomping them when I would see one. I was just trying to get through without being overly reactive to them. Well, finally, mid-trial, the judge has enough because his office is right next to that courtroom.
Yep.
And he says, we're going to finish this trial in the large courthouse, large courtroom. I was thrilled because that was the last place Virginia Ridley had been seen in public, September 15, 1970. So now we're bringing her writings into the room where she was last seen. And to me, I'm not a big ghost person. I never have been, but the eeriness was palpable. It was so eerie because I really felt like she's in here with us. She's acquitting her husband because she has a paper that explains pretty much everything they're bringing up. Why didn't she go to her father's funeral? Oh, well, here, this is here. Why is she not medicating? Oh, well, here's in the margin of one of her Bibles. God told me today to stop taking my medicine. He's going to take care of me from here on. They put up a pharmacist who was a very nice guy that Alvin always smiled and said, he likes me. And I said, Alvin, he's a state witness. And they put him up to say that he was one of the only pharmacists in town, had never filled a prescription for her. Well, thanks to Alvin, we had the bottles. We had the bottles from his pharmacy. And coinciding with Virginia's writing in the Bible in 1977, we had months and months and years of empty bottles up until September of 1977. That was the year. Then the bottles are filled for several months before Alvin just eventually stopped getting them because she really wasn't taking them. So everything fell into place so beautifully. And my cross-examination of the state medical examiner who was insisting this was from asphyxiation, it went on all day, hour after hour. And I finally got him to admit, okay, it's possible she had a seizure, but maybe he killed her after the seizure while she was weak. And it was like, okay, wait a minute. So I felt like one of my lawyer friends said, man, you've got this in the bag as long as you keep Alvin off the stand. And that was never our plan for Alvin to testify, never. Because I told him, I said, people will, when you want to talk about the van and the housing project, housing authority, that's going to make you sound cold and indifferent about your wife. Well, we went to lunch that day. Things were actually going badly because Alvin made me hire another forensic pathologist who was a disaster. He was not even licensed. I did not vet him well. We found him on the internet. This was 1998. I thought everything on the internet was just great. You know, no, it was a disaster. And I felt like I may have just lost this trial by putting that guy up. The DA just destroyed him. And so we go to lunch, and Salesman Sam and Alvin, and then Alvin had this little following of people from a church. Alvin notoriously went to different churches and kind of begged from them and would get some money, and then he would go to another church. And so he had a new church crop of people, a blonde family, and had their children with them. And I said, look, why don't you just eat with them? I was so frustrated. I said, I'll pay for everybody's lunch. Just sit over there and eat with them. I'll sit over here. Well, we're walking back to the courthouse, and Alvin tells me that during lunch, Jesus appeared and told him that he had to testify. Now, that's Alvin's right to testify. It's any defendant's right to testify or not testify. But the problem was, I could just see my whole case slipping away because I could not explain why Alvin was so obsessed with this ancient civil litigation and not so obsessed about his wife. But I took him into the Roach room to practice with him. I put him on the stand and showed him the different perspective. He's going to be a lot closer to jurors now. And I kind of tripped him up on a couple of times. And I said, Alvin, you cannot say anything good about yourself. It sounds like crazy advice, but you can't. We just have to talk facts. Because once you say something good about yourself, it's going to unleash a bunch of stuff that I have kept out of this case about yourself. If you put your good character into evidence, your bad character is evidence of bad character is going to come flowing in. Well, he insisted, and I couldn't stop him. And Alvin testified beautifully.
Really?
The best witness of the entire case. And an Atlanta reporter said, because I laid out, well, because he wanted me to, all the ancient litigation. I was just showing the jury how preposterous his positions were, but that's how he thought. And Virginia wrote about the litigation. So we had that to help us.
Yeah.
And she was behind him. And I think she was the real lawyer behind him. There's a glossary that she made of legal terms that she made for Alvin, and using a dictionary and wrote it out for him. And so it all got in, everything he wanted to do. And the Atlanta reporter said, Alvin Ridley took the stand that he's been trying to occupy for 30 years. And it was true, because most of his stuff didn't get to court. It got thrown out. And he got to release it all. And of course, then I would forget how literal he was. And I would think, this is going so great. And Alvin, tell the court, what did you lose? And I was hoping he'd say my best friend, the love of my life. And he goes,
the damn truck.
He goes, oh, the funeral bill.
Oh, God.
And so the jurors intuitively figured out that Alvin was eccentric, but that he was harmless, and they acquitted him on all counts.
Beautiful.
Now, flash forward, I give this story away. Alvin and I both give this story away to anybody who will listen. Forensic Files, American Justice, People Magazine did a feature on it. Washington Post on the front page did a feature on it in 1999.
Wow.
And Fuji Television out of Japan came and did it's hilarious. It's on YouTube because it's just in the classic television kind of style with some voiceovers by observers. And the first time I heard it, I thought they've got some accidental bleed over from another show. Oh no, it's people reacting just with their voices. And so I said to Alvin, I said, part of the transactionalism toward the end of the trial is, I said, I need this. Let me buy your wife a tombstone. She doesn't have one. Well, my mom and daddy don't have one either. I said, okay, I'll buy them all tombstones. And there were these little metal markers that usually were replaced pretty quickly. So we had to figure out which one was his wife, which one was his wife's was fairly fresh, but his mother and father. And I said, Alvin, I want to go ahead and get you one. And so we got, the data, the vital data, date of birth, full name, that goes standard. But then you got a little discretion, date of death. But then you got a little discretion on what you can put about them. And Alvin really enjoyed that. He used the stock stuff, though, that was like helpful father, loving mother, loving wife and friend. And then I said I needed to go, and I went ahead and paid for the tombstones, and I left Alvin with the tombstone guy because he was a friend, so I knew he wouldn't freak out. And I said, Alvin, I want you to think before you decide what to put on how you want to be remembered. That little free line that we get. And I said, why don't you put an innocent man? I just think that would be profound. You're going to go to your grave protesting your innocence. So please put that. I left 20 years to the day of Virginia Ridley's death. I take Alvin to the grave, and I had not been there since I bought the stones for him at that little shop in Ringgold. And for the first time, I see what Alvin Ridley, which of course does not have a date of death. So when your readers go looking him up on Find a Grave, no date of death means they're probably still alive. And on the discretionary spot, you know what he put? TV repairman.
There you go.
And you can go on Find a Grave right now and look up Alvin Ridley and see that. Because they took the picture from one of my social media posts. So I asked Alvin, and Alvin's measure of people was whether they liked him or not. He always said about my father, he likes me. He always said about the pharmacist, he likes me, even though we kind of humiliated the pharmacist with showing him that he was wrong about the bottles. And he was elderly and he was kind. And he said, I just don't have good records. But he seemed kind of relieved that, he could help Alvin, and
So you don't think it was malicious? You think
it never was malicious by
interesting.
him.
Okay.
And so it was a small town, and people were called to give testimony, and I could tell from the get-go that he was not into being a state witness. But I asked Alvin at the end of it, I said, Alvin, you never explained. I've asked you many times, usually in frustration, why me? Why did you stalk me to get me to talk to you? And why did you put me through it? In the trial, his testimony was going so well. I was saying, well, Alvin, as a matter of fact, through all these years of litigation, you've never kept a lawyer from the beginning to the end of it, have you? Before me, have you? And just a perfect comic timing, he said, so far. So in other words, I could get canned at any minute during the trial. And so the jurors were chuckling. And I thought, man, I've never seen this in a murder trial where the jurors are kind of enjoying themselves. My friend, the DA, looked unhappy about it, but there's so much more in the book. And I actually used the trial transcript for the trial.
Oh, really?
I had to shorten it, but I wanted to make sure that nobody could accuse me of putting words in their mouth.
Right.
And Alvin and I went over all the episodes together in our weekly lunches. Alvin will turn 82 in early March, right after the book comes out. And he's very excited, but we were working on a podcast 3 years ago when one of the jurors from the case, who is now a nurse in Alaska, she suggested to the podcaster during her interview, she said, please ask McCraken if he thinks Alvin is autistic. I had never thought of that. We learned
you just thought
so
he was
much
odd and
more
eccentric.
in the meantime. But I started thinking about it. I started reading up on it.
Mm-hmm.
It explained the obsessions. It explained why he was a crackerjack TV repairman in the picture tube age.
Mm-hmm.
And the changing of that technology explained why his business failed.
Mm-hmm.
Because people were buying solid state, much smaller sets, and they were just throwing them away. You don't get a solid state TV fixed.
Right.
You replace it. It's not a piece of furniture anymore like it was when Alvin sold them. And so Alvin has since now acknowledged that it was probably solid state circuitry that did him in and not the taking of his van. So, he can be logical and reasoned with now. But I took him to Atlanta to be evaluated, and he wanted me to go with him to the first part. And the doctor said, I want to mention a couple of phrases to you and see how you react to them. One is, she's gotten under your skin. Well, Alvin looked visibly uncomfortable at the notion of somebody getting under your skin, literally.
He took it very literal.
Took it very literally. So the next one was, he wears his heart on his sleeve. And Alvin raised his hand and said, I know that one. He's got an artificial heart. And now I have for 30 years had an insulin pump. And I always joked when I talked to Alvin about it. I would say, well, there's my pancreas going off in my pocket. And I would show it to him and just brag about the technology. And so Alvin thought he had matched me there with the the heart on his sleeve. That's an artificial heart. And so the findings were that Alvin was very much on the autistic spectrum. It has been a true gift. With his permission, he's allowed me to tell it in the community. And the community is just so much warmer to him now.
Yeah.
They understand that occasionally there's going to be a blank stare. Mm-hmm. And occasionally his emotions are not going to meet the moment. Mm-hmm. And so that also finally formed this book in my head, and it's in pre-sale now, but by the time when is this drop? Do you know? When is it?
Literally tomorrow.
Oh, excellent.
Well, I don't drag my feet, bub.
It's on pre-sale until February 20th, so it'll just be here if you order it in a week or so, and then it should be available in bookstores, Target, Walmart, Barnes and Noble, and of course the giant Amazon.
Yeah. And you doing Audible too, or no?
Audible is happening as we speak.
There you go. Are you doing it?
I wish. I wanted to badly. I did send them a pronunciation guide because we do say things a little differently down here.
A little down south. Yep.
There's a town nearby in the street that my old office was off of that is LA capital FAYETTE, named after the Marquis that helped us in the Revolutionary War. How would you pronounce that?
Was it Lafayette?
We call it Lafayette.
Lafayette. Okay.
Lafayette. We emphasize the Fay, and the last is just a ut.
Listen, so, I'm in Pittsburgh, so you don't have to explain any weird vernaculars, any weird accents. We are northern hillbillies up here. We have a whole different. We make up words, add ings and ers to random words that don't need them.
Well, I want to show you. Will people be seeing this or just hearing it?
Seeing it, yeah,
okay,
both. Fantastic. Whatever they want to do. Yeah.
Well, this poster back here is the cover. Yeah, I wanted to make sure people know because there's more than one Zenith Man book.
Okay.
Sadly, the other Zenith Man book is a fictionalization of our story that somebody did.
Really?
Without telling us.
That's annoying.
But I gave the story away for years and years, so it was cobbled together through all the tellings.
Yeah, but don't Frankenstein this story up.
I know, but I just thought, well, the best revenge is telling it right.
Right.
And having a better book. And that's what I think I've done.
I don't think that's going to be very difficult. This is a hell of a story, man.
Nothing against that author, but she didn't know these inside details in her book. But the Zenith, this is Alvin and Virginia Ridley.
Really?
At an amusement park in 1965, a little amusement park here in our community called Lake Winnipesaukee. And they're in a photo booth. And there's another frame from the photo booth strip inside the book. And I'm just, Maya Angelou once said, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. I've been bearing that agony for 25 years, and I've been giving it away. And it has been the most satisfying thing to tell it. And I hope to be able to give talks on it as long as Alvin is threatening to live to 110 so that he'll have almost 30 more years of food and meals from me. But I love the guy. He's I
was gonna say, it sounds like you guys have been like what is it? The
odd couple.
I mean, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful story though.
But I have no qualms about being near him when he doesn't smell the best. I got over that during the trial because after that testimony, I thought, man, we've been through war together. I'm going to give you a hug. And
plus you came in there smelling like skunk. So, pot calling the kettle black at that point.
Exactly. And interestingly enough, there was a part of our back office door that was usually latched and it was open. And there was a straight slit into the flexible air conditioning vent before it led into the steel air conditioning vent. So I suspected for a while that he might have put that skunk in there. I have seen him feed raccoons midday. Yep. He has this thing with animals that's very interesting. Feeds squirrels and raccoons by the hand, which is not advisable, I would say. Anyway, I hope that Alvin, and I think Alvin is having his best life now.
I was going to say, has his quality of life improved?
Oh, definitely. But my secretary and I make sure that he's got good, clean clothes, heaters. Good. When it gets down, and it got down again this year into the teens, I put him up in a local hotel where he's got 200 channels to go through as opposed to the over-the-air box that he uses now. And he watches these crazy shows that come over the air thing. One in particular he's a fan of called Cheaters.
Oh, God.
And he talks about getting another girlfriend, but he's worried that he might have two girlfriends and Cheaters will roll up on him in Ringgold, Georgia, and humiliate him, as he says. So maybe if this book is a real huge deal, I'll bring Alvin back and let you meet him on your show sometime.
That would be I don't even have the words for that. That would be amazing because and just to give you a little of my where I'm at with it. You start the story and you're like, okay, he may have done it. And you start unraveling the onion, right? And you start understanding, all right, well, he is a little quirky. All right, well, he's doing this. Well, hold on. So now the wife, there's no evidence about that. It's literally plastered on the wall. And there are timestamps based on current events. And you got this guy, he's like the lovable loser of the story here. And it's like he becomes endearing. It's like, wait, there's not something right here. Like he may be a little off. And then that's where that other level of sympathy comes in. You're like, this dude didn't do this. What are we talking about?
And as much as poor as his clothes and mismatched and smelly, he always had this air of dignity about him.
Yeah.
His hair was always combed perfectly. He was always clean shaven. And that's hard to pull off when you've cut your water off to keep it from freezing in the house. And I would be buying him jugs of water. We've since got that fixed but he still cuts it off in the winter to keep it from freezing. So in any event, he's been a blessing to me. I went on to what has been a very satisfying career, only doing criminal cases.
Yeah.
And I've had some doozies, and maybe there's more books there, but Alvin gave me a second act. And, I thought I was washed up, and the book goes into that a little bit. Been a couple of reviewers that have not enjoyed the parts about me, but I'm thinking, the publisher says you have to show how this changed you.
You're a part of the story.
Yeah, and I went through hell with this guy, not knowing why I was going through it. And then I have the satisfaction in the acknowledgments to say, okay, here's what was driving him all along.
Right.
And I feel so fortunate that that I was able to find a way to work with him, even not knowing what was driving him.
And it's the funny thing is you did it completely. You stumbled into it.
Absolutely.
The whole transactional thing, and not for nothing, I'm definitely interested if we were able to do this again and I'd meet him because my kiddo's on the spectrum. So
wonderful.
So it's
you
more
would have spotted it, if I just introduced you to Alvin and I didn't know, you would have probably spotted it.
Yeah, I mean my kiddo is more on the side of the Asperger's part of it.
Yeah, probably smart as a whip.
Yeah. I mean, he literally is self-taught guitarist. He has like 4 guitars. He plays a lute from Turkey. It's craziness.
It's fascinating. Alvin tells a funny story about in the Army. He was already fixing TVs when he got drafted. Yeah. He got drafted because he made prank phone calls to the draft board ladies' home, who talk about small towns. These were also the people that ran the housing authority that evicted him. So they, there was a lot of revenge to be exacted on Alvin. But he thanks them now posthumously because he has VA benefits.
Yeah.
And thank God we've got those, because
I was gonna say, like, I don't know what he. I mean, I'm assuming he had some kind of assistance via government at this point.
Yeah, but he hadn't gotten on any disability yet. I got him on the disability, and he just has a pretty happy life. He comes and sits in my office a lot. My secretary used to work with developmentally disabled adults, so she's perfect for the role. And for the last 15 years, he'll just pop in on her and they'll be sitting back there having an hour conversation before I'll show up. And sometimes she takes him to lunch if I'm stuck in court. So, we work together as a team. And I'm hoping with the book out that more people will be more comfortable to approach him and say, hey, Alvin, let me bring you a turkey plate. And
that's beautiful. Like, I'm damn near getting choked up, sincerely. Like, that is such a beautiful, wonderful, heartwarming story.
My publisher said she took the first the manuscript skiing with her and on her Kindle, and I waited for like 2 weeks thinking, oh my God, I'm going to look at the ski reports and see if there were any avalanches, because she hasn't gotten back to me and I'm feeling like I'm all out there. And she wrote back finally and she said, my companion asked me why I was laughing. And she said, it's this book. And then she said, my companion asked me why I was crying. And I said, it's this book. And so I knew they were happy. Yeah. And then through the ordeal of copy editing, which is quite an ordeal, there were like 5 or 6 people picking my book apart and my way of saying things apart. But wonderful publisher, Kensington out of New York City, under the Citadel imprint. And I've gone to New York 4 times last year, and that's fantastic. I came from Graysville, Georgia, in northern Catoosa County, with a total population of 120.
Oh my God!
Ringgold has about 5,000 or 6,000. Catoosa County has about 70,000, and we're right up against Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is a big town.
Right.
But there's been nothing better in all of my political life or anything than representing Alvin Ridley. And because of I didn't get to go to Congress, the timing was right to where I ended up with the 3 children that I have. Really, really 4, because my ex had a child later who needed a father figure, and I just took him on too.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be with any of these people had I gone to Congress.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lesson learned for all of us.
Don't go to Congress.
To accept that one too, but to accept the disappointments.
Yeah.
Because very often they are unanswered prayers that will give you the biggest breaks in life and the biggest gifts. I cannot imagine not having my children. And I know for a fact I would not have 3 of them because they were adopted. I had to be at the exact right place and the right time to be the father of these children.
Life is funny that way.
And that place was Kazakhstan.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
All right.
So there were so many hoops and timings and flights and everything that had to work just so. So I just want, the people that listen to you to not give up on things when things seem to not be going well. And I dedicate the book to my father because we were dealing with his alcoholism in this period of time. And he shows up at the trial. And Alvin liked him a lot. And he was sober. And I think it was perhaps the first thing he ever came to that I did that he was completely sober. And so it was, at age 39, I was still dealing with, some childhood issues.
Right. A little trauma deal. Yep.
And it was overwhelming, all those things coming together at once. And Alvin, who loved my father, cried more than I did when my parents died, because Alvin kind of absorbs, and you've probably noticed this with your son, they absorb the emotions that are in the room, and they don't immediately join you in those emotions, but then it will come out. It will come out at a time us neurotypical folks would say, well, that's not right, but there's no wrong or right. It's
right.
It's almost like
their emotions are on a different time zone.
Exactly. And and those autistic traits were literally being used against Alvin at the trial. It's in the transcript.
Right.
It's in the arguments. So I want to thank you, Rich, for this wonderful opportunity.
Oh, thank you.
I violated every rule my publisher and publicist said was to be circumspect and just come back around to loop around. But I love telling this story. I hope you could tell.
And honestly, it was an absolute joy to hear it, because I understand the don't give it away because the book and all that, but it's that good of a story where you still want to read it. It's not like you covered every single part of it. You want to hear the journey and the adventure and
they've got to read about Kitty and Meowie Ridley.
Oh God. Oh boy. Maybe skipping over that part.
There's your teaser. Oh no, it's one of the best parts.
Oh boy. Well, McCraken, here's what I need from you here. I want to know where to find you, because I put all these things in the notes. So just verbally let everybody know where to find you.
Thank you. On Twitter, and because I'm honoring my father, I took on the junior as an author. So on Twitter, I'm McCraken Poston Jr. with no spaces. And
not gonna be hard to find you there.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. The plain McCraken Poston will just take you to my site that I had before for years, and it kind of directs you to. It gives you directions to the other site. So if you leave the JR off, you'll still find me. On Facebook. A McCraken Poston and a McCraken Poston Jr. You may get my son, McCraken Vaughn Poston, as well. But then on, TikTok, believe it or not, I'm 64 and I'm on TikTok.
You're 64?
It drives me crazy.
Wow, you look great for 64, buddy.
And hey, all that's real, man.
Attaboy. I'm 37 and I'm bald.
My dad was mostly pepper than salt at 85 when he died. So, but when everybody says something about my hair, I'll say, I'll give it to you for your pancreas.
There you go.
How about that?
Look, I have diabetes. So,
there you go.
I don't have that part of it yet, but I do take the insulin daily. So
Well, think about the pump. It's amazing if you can. We need a better healthcare system, though. I can tell you that much. But the other things are Amazon.
Yep.
Amazon. It's there are 2 Zenith Man books there. Mine is the one with Alvin and Virginia kissing
right in the
on
back there.
and Barnes and Noble, Walmart, Target. If you order it now, you will have it in the next week or 2 because it is launching on the 20th.
I was gonna say that's almost like a post Valentine's Day deal.
There you go. I wish it had come out on Valentine's Day. I could market the hell out of that.
Yeah.
But
wink,
anyway,
wink.
Yeah. I hope that you enjoy it. Please review it. I just asked that of the readers. Please review it. That actually informs other readers. I never knew how this industry worked until I got into it, and now I'm realizing. Please review, and I appreciate you all.
Well, look, McCraken, I cannot thank you enough for taking this time out. You're actually the longest interview I've ever done.
Well, thank you.
And I'm sitting here like, I don't care. Keep it rolling. Keep it going.
Well, you may want to chop it into 2 parts, maybe. I don't know.
I thought about it, but I'm like, I don't know, man. It's so engaging. I think it's going to be hard for people to kind of bugger off.
Well, there you go. Well, thank you, and I hope to see you again and maybe introduce you to Alvin.
It would be an honor. I appreciate it. Well, thank you for taking out time or your Sunday here. I'll have this out to you by tomorrow, but thank you so much.
Thanks, Rich. You take care. And thank you to all your listeners. Thank all of you.
Thank you.